Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Economic Times Consumer Freedom Series. My name is Rini Khanna, and together with the country's largest media conglomerate, the Times Group, I'm happy to host a series of conversations for consumer freedom with the intent of not limiting consumer choices, but also protecting the customer in a largely digital era of merchandise. In November 2020, the Times Group, through ETH, an Economic Times initiative, curated a thought leadership platform to push the narrative around consumer choice, highlighting the need for progressive regulations to be based on science rather than blanket bans. The multi-stakeholder discussion saw participation from renowned speakers from various walks of life, sharing their thoughts on the subject. The platform attempts to impress upon decision makers the need to stop, ponder, and take a long-term view of the social and economic impacts of legislation that looks to just ban and not regulate different products in the free market. The Economic Times Consumer Freedom Series features interactions with thought leaders from across the globe on issues pertaining to consumer freedom and their choices, including but not limited to freedom of choice, a democratic approach to lawmaking, prohibitions, bridging the gap between buyers and sellers, offering safer alternatives as a choice, and innovation-driven economy, and much, much more. Today's conversation features an interaction with thought leaders from the domain of digital and social media and looks closely at a scientific approach to tobacco harm reduction. To help me do this, we have with us our subject experts, Suhel Seth and Dr. Kiran Melkote. Suhel Seth is the managing partner of Counselage India, a branding and marketing consultancy engaged in legal, accounting, and auditing activities, besides tax consultancy, market research, as well as business and management consultancy. His clients include the Tata Sons, Mahindra & Mahindra, Max India Limited, Coca-Cola, the RP Sanjeev Goenka Group, and GMR, to name but a few. So he is also a best-selling author and writes columns on current affairs and the social landscape of India for leading newspapers the world over. And as you may have guessed by now, Suhel certainly wears many hats, and in addition to his marketing career, has acted in over 135 English plays and was voted the best theatre actor by Khushwant Singh. He's also featured in several Bollywood movies and appears regularly on television shows. The go-to person for companies or individuals facing reputational crises or competitive and regulatory pressures, Suhel is also a regular guest lecturer at various IIMs and IITs across the country. Dr. Kiran Melkote is an orthopedic surgeon with a wide clinical experience of about 9 years and has worked with prestigious organizations like the Manipal Hospitals, Bangalore, and Columbia Asia Hospital, Gurgaon. Dr. Kiran has been actively involved in promoting tobacco harm reduction in India and is a member of the AHRER, which is the Association for Harm Reduction, Education and Research. Thank you to both of you for joining us and welcome to this episode. If I could begin with you, Suhel. Lately, we've seen a lot of products and services such as cryptocurrencies, mobile apps, even wheat, and many others being subjected to blanket bans, which seem to be heavy on ideology, but weak on research. How can consumer rights and policies as a general practice become more rooted in scientific findings and, broadly speaking, become more evidence-based?
So I think this is a great question. What is important is not just consumer freedom, it is also the responsibility of people who are in policy making, which is largely the government when it works, to ensure that that policy allows for three things. Number one, I must as a consumer be aware of my rights. Number two, the product that I buy must be of substantive value, both in terms of efficacy as well as in terms of value for money. Number three, it must not be violative of any medical or any clinical or any social malpractice. For instance, when I say social malpractice, should I be buying clothes which are hand-stitched by children who are in forced labor? You remember what happened with Bangladesh, and they had to go through a whole level of factory certification. As far as crypto is concerned, there are 2 or 3 issues. You can ban the currency, but can you ban the technology? The answer is no. Blockchain is the platform on which crypto or from which crypto emerges. It's like saying, please don't show pornography on internet, but if you do, I will ban the internet. So there's no logic to that. Responsible media houses like Bennett Coleman, which are the owners of the Times of India and Economic Times, have recognized over the years that policy must be made available in terms of both transparency and clarity, and it must ensure that the consumer is aware of what he or she is getting into. With crypto, what has happened really is we have created a fear psychosis. The fear psychosis in 2 parts. Number 1, you have made crypto seem illegal even before you've understood what the hell crypto is. So you almost tarred it with the brush of evilness when it doesn't exist. Number 2, you have been unable to look at, as you rightly said in your question, to look at global examples. Singapore, which is a fine example of governance and transparency, has not banned crypto, but they've got very severe norms under which crypto functions. The Reserve Bank of India, currently headed by Shaktikant Das, one of the finest governors the Reserve Bank has ever had, made a comment which was actually a very innocent comment saying that crypto cannot replace sovereign currency. The government, which is normally weak in its understanding, suddenly reacted saying, oh my God, governor said crypto is bad. The governor simply said crypto cannot replace sovereign currency. What is crypto? When we were not around, and when Adam and Eve perhaps were, you had barterable trade. Barters continued as a form of trade mechanism for years. Then what was introduced was you had instruments of currency which were introduced, largely metals. That's how gold became the bulwark currency, or the bulwark bullion, as it were, for countries. You measured the wealth of a country against its gold reserves. India was not called Pital ki Chidiya, it was called Sone ki Chidiya for a reason, because gold was the benchmark bullion. Times have changed. Today, people are inventing another form of currency in what I call a closed user group. That closed user group may include a Kiran, may include a Dharmaraj, a Dimple, may include a Rini. And we say, listen, we're happy. We're part of this chain. If you trade, it's Rini, it's like offshore gambling. I mean, we're the only stupid people in the world where we allow casinos in water, but not on land. So the jokers actually get into a boat from land, obviously, go to the goddamn casino, kill themselves and come back. And we think we've followed the law. The law must be efficacious. It must be easy to interpret, and it must be easy to enforce. If these things are fine, consumer freedom is guaranteed. But consumer freedom is also not a fundamental right and never should be, because then in India, we will complain about everything, from porridge to safety pins. That's who we've become. So this is my introductory comment on the topic today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Suhel, for putting that out so clearly. Dr. Melkote, my understanding is that harm reduction refers to the policies, the programs, and the practices that aim to minimize the negative societal impacts associated with substance abuse. Could you explain this in a more simpler term for the benefit of our viewers?
Sure, Rini, I'll do that. So if you actually want to think about harm reduction as a concept, so it has a much broader scope than substance abuse alone. It's a life lesson, which is essential for our survival. We see it everywhere, every single day. All of us practice it, but we don't label it as harm reduction. That's probably why we are not aware of it. We use seatbelts when we drive a car. We use a helmet when we drive a motorbike. So that's harm reduction. For safe sex, we use a condom. That's harm reduction. We also use low-calorie sweeteners. That's harm reduction again. We use sunscreens. That's harm reduction. So harm reduction, if you want to put it very simply, it's a pragmatic recognition that everything under the sun, including the sun, is actually causing harm. And our life involves a series of choices in order to mitigate these risks. If you talk about substance abuse alone, so in many situations, what happens is the drug itself is less harmful than the sort of associated risky behavior that follows. For instance, if you have an injectable drug abuser, the problem is needle shape. So, and you also have a problem of overdoses. So, in those instances, harm reduction is a well-recognized strategy. Even the WHO endorses it. So, where you have these needle exchange programs, they actually provided safe injection sites. They provided methadone clinics. So that way, you're trying to mitigate the harms of substance abuse. And if you actually face it, if you look at the sole or the core objective of public health, it's to save lives, right? And if you actually apply the same thing to smoking, if you apply it to the overall use of tobacco, this would appear to be logical and obvious. If you can take the harm out of tobacco use, that would benefit society as a whole. So the concept of tobacco harm reduction is extremely simple. The need for nicotine is why a person continues to use tobacco despite the associated harms. But nicotine on its own is not carcinogenic and it's far than tobacco as a whole. So if a person were to consume nicotine without any tobacco, they would be reducing harm from tobacco by a very significant margin. But somehow there is continued resistance to tobacco harm reduction as a viable strategy, even from the WHO. And this unfortunately seems to be driven by ideology rather than science. So many of the Western countries, mainly the UK as well as New Zealand now, they have actually embraced harm reduction. They've embraced vaping, they've embraced e-cigarettes as part of their national tobacco control programs. And it has paid rich dividends. But many other countries have also taken the opposite route, notably our own. So the earlier dictum in public health used to be saving lives any which way. But somehow, somewhere, it has morphed into only my way. I think I'll stop there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'll come back to you on this and talking about tobacco and cigarettes and things like that. Let me come back to you on that. Suhel, if I could turn to you, the Department of Consumer Affairs had in the recent past launched a campaign termed Jago Grahak Jago to make consumers aware of their rights and generally pass on information which the consumer was not aware of. How do you view the effectiveness of this kind of messaging? Is there a role that they play in educating and in empowering these communities?
See, there are two things to this. One is I totally endorse the fact that a campaign is needed, and that campaign did have its benefits. But you must have conflict resolution and you must have grievance resolution. So if I were the government, these are the three things I would do. Look, Rini, you know me long enough to know that I'm not a problem provider. I believe that we need solutions. So what would I do? I would create consumer ombudsman for categories, like you have ombudsman for, other service genres, where I would impress upon companies that they must have a chief grievance officer. If those people can pay pots of money to, the technology officer, this officer, that officer, but that must be explained in a wrapper of why it's important to address consumer concerns. So I advise a lot of companies, and only the chairman and CEOs there, I've told them ad nauseum, get onto Twitter. If someone complains, say thank you, I'm going to look into it. Sometimes half the battle is won if you acknowledge the fact that there's a problem. If you don't acknowledge the problem, and if you're in denial, you upset the consumer even more. So first thing, I would impress upon companies through a Jago Grahak Jago, it should also be Jago Companies Jago. अगर आप अपने ग्राहकों की खबर नहीं रखेंगे या उनकी देखभाल नहीं करेंगे तो वो कोई और जगह चले जाएंगे. The loss of consumers is a huge thing. Now, where Kiran works in the entire healthcare business, it's even more critical because not only do they abuse you, they also then use word of mouth to completely belittle you further. And it could range from not getting an appointment to a surgery going wrong. Second, I would ensure that there are consumer courts which have teeth, not consumer courts which are just litigious, processes which are yet another pipeline of legal redressal. Third, I would publish the names of the most caring consumer companies. See, the thing really is, India is the capital of the world for quizzing. We love lists. Top 10 mein ye, top 300 mein ye, all of that. If the government rewards people or companies saying these are the most consumer-friendly companies, two things will happen. Suppose Rini is making, let's say, hand wash, and Rini gets the award and Kiran doesn't. I'm going to say, as a consumer who's sitting on the fence saying, my God, Rini is being recognized by the government. The government is doing that with an independent research or validation organization. Rini, therefore, is the person that I should buy my products from because I know kuch golmaal nahi hoga. Now, how difficult are these three things to do? They're easy. But why do we not do them? Because we are more concerned with the goddamn process rather than with problem solving. You see, consumers don't buy brands, really. They buy benefits. You don't buy Colgate. Your ultimate objective is to have white, healthy teeth. I don't go to Kiran if I have a problem with my so-called tennis elbow. I go because I don't want pain when I wake up the next morning. My benefit is that he is the means to providing me that benefit, or you are the means to providing me that handwork. So I'm saying, if we reimagine, so the government is not wrong, but the government typically hasn't completed the loop. You've got some stupid bureaucrat who believes that we must launch this campaign in a half-baked manner without closing the loop. The day you close the loop, in fact, I would say, now that we have this platform and the cloud of the Bennett Coleman group, why doesn't Bennett Coleman do this? Instead of the ET Awards only for all these people, you create the ET Awards for India's most consumer-friendly companies. When you do that, you will get a lot of people excited. And see, again, we've given Times of India what they always love, free advice.
Thank you, Suhel. I'm sure that whoever's listening in will take up on that advice. Dr. Melkote, if I could turn to you now and, staying on the subject of mass communication, regardless of what the science is, electronic cigarettes, for whatever reason, are still viewed as, not life-saving interventions. And in many scenarios, they're considered to be more dangerous. So why aren't we able to work around these misconceptions? And what do you think are the recommendations when it comes to such misinformation campaigns that run in society?
So if you just go back to the concept a little bit, nicotine substitution or replacement therapies are not new. Many of the pharma firms themselves market nicotine gums, lozenges, patches. So one has to only look at their safety profile. So nicotine is not the villain. I mean, if it was, do you think these farmers would risk big lawsuits by actually marketing a carcinogenic product? So the other thing to remember is, in this world today, 99% of all nicotine comes from tobacco. It's less than 1% which is manufactured in the lab. So even the pharma companies are actually getting their nicotine from tobacco. But there seems to be some magic in the way that the same nicotine becomes safe when it's marketed by big pharma. So, in effect, there's a feeling that, your nicotine is safe and all the rest is unsafe. So there's that the same molecule has that dichotomy. The problem is, again, if you actually look at the problem again, the gums and patches may not work so well for smokers. Smokers need a little bit more sort of behavioral support, maybe in terms of a hand-to-mouth action and stuff like that. So pharma companies indeed recognized this first. They saw that their patches and gums are not working. They introduced inhalers. So you had nicotine inhalers. They're not here in India, but they are there in the West. So this was an implicit admission that smokers need some sort of a nicotine delivery product that mimics the act of smoking. So when you look at the whole concept of PNDS, or when talking about the electronic nicotine delivery devices, for example, vaping and e-cigarettes, so they are far, far safer than combustible tobacco. But they've been demonized repeatedly so much so that they're seen as much more dangerous. But the fact remains, no one has ever died of vaping nicotine, ever. And when we speak of traditional tobacco control groups, when we talk to them about these things, so there's an underlying sense of outrage. It's like, how dare you find your own way to quit tobacco and save your own life? That's my job to tell you how to do it. Never mind that our success rate is only 0.5%. So as a doctor, I'm ashamed that in our country, nearly 80% of my colleagues believe that nicotine is carcinogenic. And these very same people have no problem just prescribing a nicotine gum or a patch. So they don't stop to think what they're doing. So as a part of AHRER, we have been trying to educate our fellow doctors and hopefully we try to make a difference. But ultimately, the solution to misinformation begins with education. And it's vital that we also educate our policymakers as well as doctors about nicotine. The other problem that faces public health today is it has a long history of hiding the whole truth. So they try to sort of compartmentalize the truth, or they think that we can't handle the truth. And they don't address nuances because they believe that they're acting in our best interest, and in their eyes, their children who do not know any better. But the flip side of all this is we lose trust. And they need to realize that trust is earned by honest actions. It's not implicit. Just because they are part of public health does not mean they have to be trustworthy. And if you look at the whole, if you look at the whole COVID situation, I think they really need to earn back the trust by actions, by honesty. So I think we start with education.
Yeah, education seems to be the key word. Suhel, social media is a part of everyone's internet life. Anyone with internet access is familiar with Facebook, Twitter, Insta, LinkedIn, and you name it. Digital marketing runs on these social media platforms to increase the brand awareness as well as to be engaged with the consumer. Despite being popular, it is observed that a large number of people are adversely affected by social media presence or maybe even social media absence. And they're all experiencing a huge void in their lives as the world around us is continuously changing. With this as a background, do you think addiction to social or digital media will be a threat to humanity or ethics as we see it? Or do you feel that consumers need to have a choice to experiment with?
Look, I'm a great believer that you must allow for free choice, but free choice can't be unregulated choice. I can't abuse Rini Simon without knowing her or without knowing what she's done and then get away with it. But I cannot prevent me from thinking about abusing her as long as I don't do it. In the sense, you cannot curb my freedom of understanding, of expression, of assimilation. But I think now in India, we have laws in place which are pretty strict and pretty good. You will see there'll be a course correction, really.
Yes.
It's the same thing that people said, oh, books are going out of style. People are spending less time on books. Today, books, you talk to publishers, they're selling more books than they've ever sold. There will be a time when people will slowly wean off, social media. Already people are. I use it mainly to abuse the government or abuse people in power. I don't use it for anything else. And I use it to retweet blood needs when people need blood. But otherwise, I'm having a lot of fun. Why would you deprive me of fun? The other thing is, digital media can play a great engagement role between company and consumer. Because otherwise, I have no access. Today, if I want something sorted, I can just tag the CEO of that company and you watch, it'll get done. But earlier, I had no recourse. If you send an email, the email would never be answered.
But there is an element of abuse there too.
Of course. So what I advise companies is always be truthful. For instance, let's say Kiran makes a complaint. Oh, you send me this toaster. Toaster was crap, blah, 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 blah. I then send out evidence-based tweets saying he's wrong. This is the toaster that was delivered. This is his comment earlier. This, to our mind, is pernicious and malafide. Once you say that to him, you will silence all the people who use lies and deceit to tarnish reputations on social media.
You also get to see kangaroo courts happening, no?
But kangaroo courts are everywhere. You think television is not, print media is not. There are kangaroo courts only where there are too many monkeys. The less monkeys we have both in and outside Parliament, will be better off.
Okay, those were your words, not mine.
Absolutely, I stand by them. I completely indemnify the Times Group.
Right. Dr. Melkote, I know that India has around 300 million tobacco users, almost 300 million. And the government's goal has been to reduce tobacco usage by 30% by 2030. it seems unbelievable. I mean, that's the only word that I have. How is this going to be possible in the absence of widespread harm reduction awareness?
We've actually spoken about this earlier. So it's that there's a trick in that statement actually. So when they talk about 30%, so if you look at the WHO Global Action Plan on tobacco, it calls for a 30% relative reduction in smoking prevalence or in use of tobacco prevalence by 2025 as compared to 2010. So it's a lot of words just to say that, you take the total number of people who were smoking at 2010, and by the time they hit 2025, we want that number to reduce by 30%. It's not the total number of smokers per se, it's a relative reduction. So if you want to talk about the actual numbers and the actual targets, I think these targets are too low. 30% is too low, 30% relative is too low. I'll tell you why. It is in fact a 7% real reduction, and it is spaced over 15 years. 30% relative equals 7% real reduction over 15 years. So for context, our country, you're right, we have about 26.7 crore users. That's 267 million tobacco users. And 7% of that translates to 1.9 crores or 19 million, 19 million over 15 years. So 19 million over 15 years is 1.27 million or 12 lakhs every year. That's the target our great government wants to achieve. And look at it. The death rate from tobacco in India is 13.5 lakhs. So you just let people die and you have hit your targets. You don't have to do anything. So, the rates are so low. 13 lakh people die every year from tobacco. The government wants to save 12 lakh people from tobacco, or they want to reduce the rate of usage of tobacco by 12 lakhs. So even if they do nothing, those targets are already met. So basically,
so are we approaching this the wrong way?
No, yes, absolutely. We should be looking at real targets and not relative targets. So if we adopt harm reduction in a meaningful way, even 30% absolute reduction would be a realistic goal for our country. Now you look at the pattern of use in our country.
So simple measures that could be put into place. I mean, you're talking about harm reduction techniques which are available outside of the country, are not being made available for consumers inside the country. How is this going to change? How is this scenario going to alter itself?
So if we adopt harm reduction in a meaningful way, even this 30% absolute number should not be a problem. So basically, if you look at the pattern of tobacco use in India, out of the 267 million, 200 million are smokeless tobacco users. 72 million use BDs and 28 million use cigarettes. But all the efforts of the government is targeting those 28 million to the exclusion of the larger portion who use BDs and smokeless tobacco. So if you focus on the larger majority and you use the existing things that are already in India, for example, lozenges, gums, and patches are still available here, you can use those, and these would definitely be receptive to oral tobacco. Now, looking at the smokers, oral tobacco options are not enough. So the whole ban on the sale and manufacture of electronic devices should be rethought. And I think that's also something, that's going to happen eventually, because if you look at the science, it's already there. So it's just a matter of waiting it out. And I'm sure this decision will also be rolled back. And then we'll start to see some real action in this space.
Thank you. We've almost reached the end of our time. I'd like to ask you, Suhel, if you'd like to close the discussion with your thoughts of, on the policy aspects of the goal and your advice to the government.
No, I think I've already given the advice mentioned earlier. But I must say that it's very important, Rini, for this debate to happen. It's very important for these discussions to take place. I'm actually very impressed by the fact that the Economic Times has taken the time out to do this. And more media outlets and channels need to follow suit. Please heed my advice about having a list where you identify India's most consumer-friendly companies, impress upon companies to create a bill of rights for their customers, like you have a Bill of Rights for patients in healthcare. Impress upon companies the need for consumer resolution. Because please remember, the old golden rule of marketing is it takes you 10 times more money to acquire a customer than to keep an existing one. So follow these simple mantras, and hopefully we'll be a more friendly, more consumer engaged, and more consumer empathetic society. The thing is not about consumer engagement, it's about corporate empathy.
Very well, sir. Thank you so much, Suhel and Dr. Melkote, for joining us today and being completely germane and candid in your responses. It was indeed a very insightful session, and I'm sure our audience would have enjoyed it as much as I did in interacting with you. Before we close, we'd like to urge the government to rethink its stance on banning products and services and take the consumer's freedom into consideration. We all know that banning is the worst form of regulation and should ideally be avoided. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Join us again as we bring you interesting conversations on consumer freedoms. Thank you, Suhel, and come back soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.